The conference room on the 42nd floor of Richardson Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I'd always loved this view, ever since Dad used to bring me here as a kid, letting me spin in his executive chair while he worked on weekends. Now 23 years later I sat in the same room, but in the furthest seat from the head of the table, the spot reserved for observers with no voting power. My Uncle Richard stood at the presentation screen, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his silver cufflinks catching the afternoon light. He'd always been the charismatic one, the one who knew how to work a room. Next to him sat my cousin Brandon, smirking as he scrolled through his phone, clearly bored by the formality of it all. As I was saying, Uncle Richard continued, clicking to the next slide, the merger with Gallagher Industries represents a $200 million opportunity. My brother, God rest his soul, would have wanted us to take bold steps to expand the family legacy. I kept my expression neutral, my hands folded calmly on the notepad in front of me. I'd learned early in life that showing emotion only gave people ammunition. The terms are straightforward, Richard went on. Gallagher gets 40% of Richardson Manufacturing in exchange for their distribution network and international contacts. We maintain majority control, expand into 6 new markets and triple our revenue within 5 years. Board member Patricia Chin nodded enthusiastically. The projections look solid, Richard. Your leadership has really turned things around since. She paused, glancing at me uncomfortably. Well, since the transition. Since my brother's death, Richard said smoothly. You can say it, Patricia. Thomas knew the business needed strong leadership. That's why he trusted me to step in as CEO. I didn't correct him. Not yet. Board member James Morrison leaned forward. What about the voting structure? This is a significant equity transfer. All family shareholders are in agreement, Richard said. Brandon and I control 51% between us. My sister Linda holds another 12% and she's already signed off. He gestured toward a woman in her 50s sitting near the windows. My Aunt Linda offered a tight smile but didn't meet my eyes. That's 63% in favor, Richard continued. More than enough to approve the merger. We can move forward immediately. What about Emma? Asked David Park, the company's CFO and one of the few people in the room who'd worked directly with my father. She holds shares too, doesn't she? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard's smile didn't waver but his eyes hardened. Emma holds a symbolic stake. 5%. A gesture from my brother to make her feel included. But let's be clear about something. He turned to face me directly. This is a family business. Richardson Manufacturing has been in our family for 3 generations. My grandfather built this company from nothing. My father expanded it. My brother and I took it global. This is about blood, about legacy. Emma was Dad's daughter, I said quietly. Emma was adopted, Richard corrected, his voice sharp. At 7 years old. After Thomas and Margaret couldn't have biological children. They gave you a home, a name, opportunities you never would have had otherwise. We all welcomed you. But let's not pretend that makes you a Richardson by blood. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Linda stared at her hands. Brandon stopped scrolling and looked up, grinning. This isn't personal, Emma, Richard continued, his tone softening into something that might have seemed kind to someone who didn't know better. Your family in the ways that matter. But when it comes to business decisions, significant decisions that affect the legacy my father and grandfather built, those need to stay with blood relatives. People who have Richardson DNA, who understand what this company really means. I understand what it means, I said evenly. Do you? Brandon spoke up for the first time, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. Because Dad and I have been running this company for 3 years while you've been doing. What exactly? You work in the marketing department, right? Entry level. Associate level, I corrected. Right, associate level. Brandon smirked. 3 years after graduating college and you're still making PowerPoints about brand awareness. Meanwhile, Dad's negotiating $100 million deals. Maybe stick to what you know, cuz. The way he said cuz made it clear he didn't consider me one. Richard held up a hand. Brandon, that's enough. Emma contributes in her own way. He looked at me with what I'm sure he thought was paternal warmth. But he has a point, sweetheart. The adult table is handling this. You don't need to worry about complicated merger negotiations. Your 5% will benefit from our decision. That's what matters. Patricia Chin cleared her throat. Perhaps we should move to a formal vote? I have another meeting at 4. Excellent idea, Richard said, moving back to the head of the table. All in favor of approving the merger with Gallagher Industries as presented. Point of order, David Park interrupted. Don't we need all shareholders present? I thought Thomas's estate planning required. The estate was settled 3 years ago, Richard cut him off. Everything was distributed according to Thomas's will. I have controlling interest as CEO and majority shareholder. Linda and Brandon hold their shares. Emma has her 5%. The math is simple. David frowned, looking at me. Emma, do you have any objections to the merger? All eyes turned to me. Richard's expression remained pleasant, but I could see the warning in his eyes. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't make this difficult. I smiled politely. I'd like to review the full terms before the vote. The full terms are in the presentation, Richard said impatiently. I'd like to review them with my legal counsel. The room went very quiet. Brandon laughed. Your legal counsel? What, did you hire a lawyer with your associate marketing salary? I think everyone has the right to legal representation when making financial decisions, I said calmly. Richard's jaw tightened. Emma, this is a board meeting, not a family therapy session. We don't have time for... Actually, David Park said slowly, pulling out his copy of the corporate bylaws. According to Section 4.3, any shareholder representing more than 2% equity can request a 48-hour review period with legal counsel before voting on major structural changes. A merger of this size definitely qualifies. Richard's pleasant facade cracked slightly. David, that's a technicality from the 1980s that nobody's ever. It's in the bylaws, David said firmly. If Emma wants to exercise that right, she can. For 5%? Brandon said incredulously. We're going to delay a $200 million deal for 5%? It's not about the percentage, Patricia Chin said, though she looked uncomfortable. It's about following proper procedure. If Emma wants time to review with a lawyer, maybe we should. No, Richard said flatly. The charm was gone now, replaced by cold authority. Absolutely not. This deal has a time-sensitive component. Gallagher's board meets next week. If we don't approve today, we lose the opportunity. Emma's 5% doesn't get to hold the company hostage. He turned to me, and for the first time I saw genuine anger in his eyes. Let me be very clear, since you seem to be confused about your position here. Your father, my brother, left you a token stake out of love. Out of obligation to the little girl he raised. But you are not a decision-maker in this company. You are not equipped to understand deals at this level. And you certainly don't have the authority to delay critical business operations. I'm not trying to delay anything, I said. I'm asking for legal review, which is my right as a shareholder. You're right. Richard's voice rose. Let me tell you about rights. My father had the right to build this company from nothing. My brother and I had the right to inherit it, to expand it, to make it what it is today. You have the privilege of benefiting from our family's work despite not being blood. That's not a right. That's generosity. Linda finally spoke up, her voice soft. Richard, maybe we should just... Stay out of this, Linda, Richard snapped. He focused back on me. You want to know the truth, Emma? Thomas felt guilty. He and Margaret spent years trying for a biological child, failing over and over. Adoption was Margaret's idea, and Thomas went along with it to make her happy. When she died 5 years later, he was stuck raising someone else's kid. He did his best. He gave you everything. But you were never supposed to be in this boardroom. The words hung in the air. Several board members looked away. David Park's expression had gone stony. I kept my voice steady. Is that why Dad put me through Harvard Business School? Because I was never supposed to be in a boardroom. He put you through Harvard because that's what good parents do, Richard said. It doesn't mean you belong at this table making decisions about the family company. You got your degree, you got your job, you got your token shares. Be grateful and step aside. Brandon leaned forward, energized by his father's anger. Look, Emma, nobody's trying to hurt your feelings. But facts are facts. You're not a real Richardson. You don't have the history, the blood, the understanding of what this company means to our family. Dad's right. You should be grateful for what you have and let the actual family handle the business. The actual family, I repeated softly. Yes, Richard said. The actual family. The people who built this. The people who have Richardson blood running through their veins. That's how family businesses work, Emma. Legacy passes through bloodlines. That's not cruel, it's just reality. I nodded slowly, reaching for my phone. I understand. Good, Richard said, relief flooding his features. Then we can move forward with the vote. Actually, I said, typing a quick message, I'd still like my legal counsel present. Richard's face flushed red. Did you not hear anything I just said? We are voting now. Your 5% doesn't get a veto. This is happening. I heard everything you said about blood and legacy and who the real family is. I looked up from my phone. That's exactly why I want my lawyer here. Your lawyer isn't going to change mathematics, Brandon said. We have 63%. You have 5. Even if you vote no, you lose. Then what's the harm in waiting 15 minutes? I asked. Richard slammed his hand on the table. Because I am the CEO of this company and I am telling you that we are voting now. This is my boardroom, my company, and you do not get to. The conference room door opened. My lawyer, Margaret Chin, no relation to board member Patricia, walked in carrying a leather briefcase. She was in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in an elegant bun and the kind of quiet authority that comes from 40 years of corporate law. Behind her came 2 more people. James Rodriguez from Whitmore & Associates, one of the city's top M&A firms, and Catherine Park from the Securities and Exchange Commission's regional office. The room went completely silent. Good afternoon, Margaret said pleasantly. I apologize for interrupting. I'm Margaret Chin, representing Emma Richardson. These are my colleagues James Rodriguez and Catherine Park, who are here to observe the proceedings. Richard stared at her. This is a private board meeting. With SEC implications given the merger's size and structure, Catherine Park said, opening her tablet. We have the right to observe any vote on structural changes exceeding $50 million in publicly traded companies. We're not publicly traded, Brandon said. You have corporate bonds on the open market, James Rodriguez said. That triggers certain oversight requirements. We're just here to ensure everything is above board. He smiled. No pun intended. Richard's face had gone from red to pale. Emma, what is this? Legal counsel, I said simply. As is my right under Section 4.3. Margaret Chin walked to the table and set down her briefcase. I've reviewed the merger proposal with Gallagher Industries. Very interesting terms. I have a few questions before any vote proceeds. We've already discussed the terms extensively, Richard said, his voice tight. This is a formality. The vote is happening. The vote will happen when all shareholders are properly informed, Margaret said. He pulled out a document. Mr. Richardson, you stated that you control 51% of company shares between yourself and your son, correct? That's correct. And you stated that this gives you majority control, making Emma's 5% essentially symbolic? Yes, Richard said impatiently. The math is simple. 51 beats 5. Indeed, Margaret said. Math is important. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you reviewed the complete shareholder registry? Richard frowned. What? The shareholder registry. The official document listing all ownership stakes in Richardson Manufacturing. When did you last review it? I don't need to review it, Richard said. I know what I own. Brandon and I have 51%. Linda has 12. Emma has 5. That's 68% accounted for. The remaining 32% is split among executive shares and legacy grants to former partners. Actually, Margaret said, pulling out another document, that's not quite accurate. She laid the paper on the table. This is the current shareholder registry, certified by the state this morning. Would you like to review it or shall I summarize? David Park leaned forward, his expression suddenly very interested. Patricia Chin had gone pale. What is this? Richard demanded. The truth about share distribution, Margaret said calmly. Let's start with your stake, Mr. Richardson. You currently own 18% of Richardson Manufacturing. The room erupted. That's impossible. Richard shouted. I own 41%. Thomas and I split the majority stake when Dad died. You did, Margaret confirmed. In 2008 you and Thomas Richardson each held 41%. However, in 2011, you sold 23% of your stake to secure a loan for a real estate investment in Florida. That investment failed and the shares were sold to cover your debt. Richard's mouth opened and closed. Those were bought back. Thomas bought them back. No, Margaret said. Thomas purchased them but not for you. He purchased them as part of a trust structure. Those shares were never returned to your name. Brandon stood up. This is bullshit. Dad, tell them. Brandon, Margaret continued, you hold 10% inherited from your mother. That part is accurate. Which means between the two of you you control 28%. Not 51. Linda has 12%, Richard said desperately. That's 40% total. Linda has 8%, Margaret corrected. 4% was transferred to charity in 2019 as part of an estate planning strategy. I have the documentation here. She pulled out more papers. Linda wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. David Park was smiling now. So the Richardson family controls 36% total? The Blood Richardson family, as Mr. Richardson so eloquently put it, controls 36%, Margaret confirmed. Which means they do not have majority control. Which means this merger cannot proceed without additional shareholder approval. Richard's hands were shaking. Where are the other shares? The executive grants, the legacy partners, we can get their votes. Most of those were consolidated over the years, Margaret said. Various buybacks and restructuring. The current registry is quite simple actually. She pulled out the final document, the official shareholder certification, and laid it in the center of the table. I watched Richard's face as he read it. Watched the exact moment he understood. No, he whispered. Yes, Margaret said. Emma Richardson holds 67% of all outstanding shares in Richardson Manufacturing. The silence was absolute. Catherine Park from the SEC leaned forward. 67%? That's a controlling interest. That makes Ms. Richardson the majority shareholder, Margaret finished. The ultimate decision-maker on all major company actions including mergers. Brandon grabbed the document, his hands trembling. This can't be legal. Dad, this can't. How did I get 67%? I asked softly. I stood up, walking slowly to the head of the table where Richard stood frozen. Let me tell you a story about blood and legacy. I took the document from Brandon's shaking hands. My father, Thomas Richardson, loved this company. But after Mom died he started thinking differently about legacy. About what it really means. He realized that blood doesn't make family. Love does. Commitment does. Understanding does. Thomas wouldn't, Richard started. Dad spent 6 years restructuring the ownership, I continued. Every time you sold shares to fund your bad investments, Richard, Dad bought them. Not for you. For me. Every time a legacy partner retired and wanted out, Dad bought their shares. For me. He set up a trust that matured on my 25th birthday, which was 6 months ago. The shares transferred automatically. David Park was grinning openly now. Thomas told me he was planning for the future. I never knew what he meant. He meant that he wanted someone who loved the company running it, I said. Not someone who saw it as a birthright. Not someone who thought blood mattered more than competence. Someone who spent their childhood in this building, who got an MBA specifically to understand the business, who worked their way up from entry level despite having a different last name. Oh wait, I have the same last name. Because I'm a Richardson. Legally. Officially. In every way that matters. Richard sank into his chair, all the color drained from his face. The 5% you thought I had? I continued. That was just the public-facing number Dad maintained to keep you complacent. The truth was in the trust documents, which I assume you never bothered to read. Too busy making decisions at the adult table. I looked at Brandon. I work in marketing as an associate because I wanted to learn the business from the ground up. Dad taught me that real leaders understand every department. I've spent 3 years learning what actually sells our products, what customers want, how the market works. While you were scrolling through Instagram during board meetings. Brandon's face had gone bright red, but he said nothing. I turned to Linda. You knew, didn't you? My aunt finally met my eyes. Thomas told me before he died. Made me promise not to say anything until the trust matured. He said you needed time to learn the business without interference. Without Richard trying to manipulate you or cut you out. And you just let Richard think he was in control? Linda's voice was quiet. Thomas was very specific. He wanted Richard to show his true colors. To prove whether he respected the company or just wanted power. She looked at her brother. I'm sorry, Richard. But today you proved everything Thomas feared. Richard looked up at me and for the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. Emma, I didn't mean what I said about blood and adoption. I was just being honest, I finished. I appreciate that actually. It makes this easier. I opened my own briefcase and pulled out a folder. The merger with Gallagher Industries is rejected. The terms are terrible. You were selling our distribution rights far too cheaply, and the international contacts you mentioned are outdated. I've had 6 months to review every deal you've made, Sir Richard, and I have to say Dad was right to worry. James Rodriguez pulled out his own documents. Ms. Richardson has asked me to review potential restructuring options. We have several recommendations regarding leadership changes. Richard stood up so fast his chair fell backward. You can't fire me. I'm family. I'm your uncle. You just spent 20 minutes explaining that I'm not really family, I said calmly. That this business should stay with blood relatives. That I don't belong at this table. I smiled. So by your own logic, you should respect the majority shareholders' decision, regardless of family relationships. It's just business, right? Emma, please. Effective immediately, I'm assuming the role of CO, I said. Richard, you're being moved to senior advisor, non-voting position. Brandon, your position as VP of Development is under review pending an audit of your project outcomes over the past 3 years. Linda, I'd like you to stay on the board if you're willing. Linda nodded, tears in her eyes. Thomas would be so proud of you. David, I continued, I want you to work with Margaret and James on establishing new oversight protocols. No more unilateral decisions. Every major action gets proper review. David Park was beaming. Absolutely. It'll be just like working with your father again. Patricia, James Morrison, the rest of the board, I hope you'll stay on. I value your experience. But let's be clear. This company is going in a new direction. One based on competence, not bloodlines. I turned back to Richard, who had collapsed back into his chair. You're not fired, Uncle Richard. Despite everything you said today, you're still family. You'll keep your salary, your office, your benefits. But you're done making decisions. Because as you so clearly explained, this is a family business. And I'm the majority of this family now. Catherine Park stood up. I think we have what we need from an oversight perspective. Ms. Richardson, you'll need to file the appropriate change of control notifications with our office within 10 days. Already prepared, Margaret Chen said, handing her a folder. Along with the updated corporate structure and new board composition. Efficient, Catherine said approvingly. Nice to see proper planning for once. She nodded to me. Congratulations, Ms. Richardson. Good luck. As the SEC observer and the lawyers began packing up, Richard finally found his voice again. You planned this. All of it. The questions about legal review making me angry, getting me to say. I didn't make you say anything, I interrupted quietly. I gave you the opportunity to treat me with respect, to include me in the decision-making process, to act like family. You chose to talk about blood and legacy and who really belongs. Those were your words, Uncle Richard. Your beliefs. I just let you express them in front of witnesses. Brandon slammed his fist on the table. This is revenge. You're punishing us for 3 years of condescension? For being called an adopted kid, like it's an insult? For being excluded from meetings and decisions? I shook my head. No, Brandon. This isn't revenge. This is responsibility. Dad left me 67% because he trusted me to run this company properly. Everything I'm doing is about protecting Richardson Manufacturing, not punishing you. Bullshit, Brandon spat. You're loving this. Finally getting to be in charge, getting to... Brandon, David Park said sharply, I suggest you stop talking. Ms. Richardson has been extraordinarily generous in not terminating your employment entirely. The project audit she mentioned? I've been keeping records. Your development initiatives have cost the company $8 million over 3 years with a return of less than $200,000. If she wanted revenge, she'd have security escort you out right now. Brandon's mouth snapped shut. I gathered my materials. We'll have a full board meeting next Monday to discuss the new strategic direction. I expect everyone to review the materials I'll send this weekend. We have a lot of work to do to fix the damage from the past 3 years. Damage? Richard said weakly. I increased revenue by 40%. You increased gross revenue by cutting quality control, outsourcing key manufacturing, and underpaying staff, I said. Net profit is up 12%, but employee turnover is at 60%. We've had 3 product recalls and customer satisfaction scores have dropped 28 points. I've spent 6 months analyzing every metric, Richard. Dad built this company on quality and reputation. You've been sacrificing both for short-term gains. David Park nodded. Thomas always said sustainable growth beats quick money. Which is why the new strategy focuses on rebuilding quality, investing in staff development, and establishing long-term partnerships instead of quick mergers. I looked around the table. Richardson Manufacturing was built on the idea that if you make the best product and treat people well, success follows. We're going back to those principles. I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the door. Margaret Chin fell into step beside me. Emma, Richard called out. His voice was broken. Please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said about you not being family. You're family. You're my niece. I thought. I stopped and turned back. You thought what, Uncle Richard? That you deserved control because of your DNA? That adoption made me less than. That Dad's love for me was just obligation. He couldn't meet my eyes. Here's what I think, I said softly. I think Dad knew exactly what he was doing. He gave you 3 years as CEO to prove yourself. 3 years to run the company, make decisions, show leadership. And at the end of those 3 years he had a trust set to transfer majority control to me. That wasn't coincidence, Richard. That was a test. One you just failed spectacularly. I walked back to the head of the table and looked at each person in turn. My father chose me. Not because of blood. Not because of obligation. Because he believed I understood what this company should be. He was right. And over the next 5 years I'm going to prove it. By running us into the ground? Brandon muttered. By bringing us back to what we were meant to be, I corrected. A company that values people. All people. Regardless of where they came from or what their DNA looks like. Margaret Chin smiled. Ms. Richardson, we should discuss the filing timeline. Of course. I nodded to the board. Thank you all for your time. Monday 9 a.m. Please don't be late. As I walked out of the conference room I heard Richard say something to Linda. Her response was clear. She's more Thomas's daughter than you'll ever be his brother. The door closed behind us and I let out a long breath. You okay? Margaret asked. I'm fine, I said. And I was. 3 years of preparation, 6 months of planning, and 1 perfectly executed reveal. Dad would have appreciated the strategy. The look on his face when you said 67%, Margaret said, chuckling. Priceless. Dad always said the best business moves are the ones your opponent never sees coming. We walked to the elevators. Behind us, through the glass walls, I could see the board members still sitting in stunned silence. Richard had his head in his hands. Brandon was pacing. David Park and Patricia Chin were looking at documents. My phone buzzed. A text from Linda. Your father would be so incredibly proud. Welcome to the adult table. I smiled and put the phone away. 42 floors up, overlooking the city my father loved, in the building he'd built from his grandfather's dream. Richardson Manufacturing. A family business. And I was family. In every way that mattered. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Restructuring. Quality improvements. Staff investments. Building the company back to what Dad had envisioned. But today I'd proven that legacy isn't about blood. It's about who you choose to carry it forward. And Thomas Richardson had chosen me.